Hello, hello, everyone. We are live again after a little bit of a hiatus for me. Hopefully, you all have been checking out my YouTube videos because I've been doing a couple of those to kind of hold you all over while I kind of took a break from the lives. But super excited to be back. It is a different time than normal, but I think that it's always fun to try new times to kind of see the audience and see what times work better for people. So definitely super excited about today's live. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them by hitting that little question mark in the bottom and asking, as well as leaving comments in the comment section here during the live and after the live when it's posted on my story. Super excited about today's live. So let's see if we can go get it. Probably will have to adjust my chair again. Hello, hello. Hello.
Hi,
How are you?
good. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, same. How's your day going so far?
Good. Going good.
A
So,
little bit earlier
yeah.
on that side of the world.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Sorry.
You're fine.
That's good.
Let's see if I can. There we go. I'm trying a different angle today because, like, now that it's 1 p.m., like, I actually have, like, natural light coming through the window. So I'm trying to, like, get that to, like, hit me in the right way.
Oh, gotcha. Where are you, what state are you in?
I'm in Virginia.
Oh, you're in Virginia? Oh, okay. Nice.
Yeah.
I've never been
So.
there.
It's definitely beautiful. This is like the perfect time of year to visit because like everything's green. Like that's my favorite part about Virginia is like the greenness of it.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. Well, I will let you go ahead and introduce yourself so people know who you are, and then we can jump into a discussion.
Oh, I'm Cam Redlusk, and we met on Instagram. And I don't know, what would you like me to say? Just
Whatever
general.
you feel like you would like to introduce about yourself.
I'm an industrial designer and illustrator and a writer, and I'm also disabled. I'm a disabled advocate, and I also happen to be an adoptee. I was raised in Michigan, and then I've been out in California for work for about almost 15 years now.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
I I absolutely love when I can connect with like other creative people because I feel like in the creative world, I feel like the world doesn't really cater to you anyway. I feel like a lot of times creatives get taken advantage of in a lot of different ways. And I think that it's always like I started to learn my worth when I started connecting with other creatives that actually
hmm
were like, you should be charging for these things instead of doing all of it for free.
That's totally a thing. What kind of creative are you in? Or
So I do like video editing and stuff
video?
like that. And I mean, I also do like writing. I can kind of paint, but I also, because I went to school for architecture, I kind of dabbled in like learning how to Photoshop and all of that. So like
Yeah,
within that, I taught myself like graphic design so that I could make my like ideas more presentable because it's
right.
hard to sell something that you can't like show someone.
Yeah, no, visuals definitely help. Um, but yeah, I know what you mean. It's funny that you mentioned that about creatives. It's totally a thing where people just like, I'm always being asked to do free artwork. Like, hey, can you do me a quick doodle? It's like, these don't take quick. But yeah, people don't realize like when they ask you to do like a free drawing or whatever, they don't realize what. I feel like creatives get that the most in terms of being asked to do free work.
Yeah, I had someone point out, I think it was a Van Gogh like story where he was like drawing on a napkin or something and like a woman asked if she could just have the napkin and he asked for like a huge amount of money for it. And she's like, it just took you like 2 seconds to make that. And he
Mhm.
was like, no, it's taken a lifetime
Yep,
because it's a skill that you have to develop. And after they told me that story, it made me realize that video editing isn't something that I just like woke up and was able to do. Like it's taken years and years of me like making not so great quality stuff and having people comment on it and making me better every single day. And I was like, oh, that does make sense. And I also do like the life coaching. So I was doing it for a very low cost when I first started off, just because I didn't see my worth in it. But
Hmm.
like someone was pointing out, they're like, and how many books and how many hours and how many things have you done to like get yourself to where you are today? And I'm like, true. So
Yeah.
I'm having people pay me for everything I've ever had to do to get me to this point to where I could do the job quicker than if they tried to do it themselves.
Yeah, that's what people aren't considering is all the schooling, all the experience. Yeah, it's different. The creative world is definitely different, and I find a lot of people that are in there and don't really understand it. So, and as an industrial designer and then future and freelancer, there is an element of that. Like I've done so much free work in my life. Like, I would just volunteer. I started video editing for people and stuff. And it's after a while, you're like, should I be charging? Because, you tend to be like, if you're a nice person or like a people pleaser, you want to like help people and do stuff. But I tend to think like a lot of my career is doing a lot of free work or advocacy work too. Um,
Yeah.
but, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think that it's amazing to like have a skill like that that you can use towards like the advocacy for like any cause in general. Like, because I also find myself when it comes to LGBT like community, like when companies and stuff want to work with me, like I'm more lenient to do it at a lower cost when I know that it's going to be helpful for a community that I really care about. But
Sure.
like also like they pay other people to work for them. So like it's just a hard little balance there to like, because like I've worked with the Trevor Project and I would never charge that like organization money because I think they do amazing work. But there
Yeah.
are other things that it's like, I'm putting in hours of work. Like it would be nice to have some type of compensation for that.
Yeah, no, totally. So.
So when it comes to being disabled, like, can you tell us a little bit more about that journey?
Yes, for sure. So I'm 42. It began, but I didn't know what it was, but it honestly probably began when I was 16 or 17. But I didn't start going to investigate it until I was about 20. And it was after about 5, 6 years that I found out I have a very rare muscle wasting genetic condition that eventually leads to complete immobility. So back then I started out using braces and then a cane. And then about 2011, I started using a manual chair. And about 4 years ago, I started using a power chair. So one of the unique things with my disability is it's progressive. So everyone in the disability world it's so varied and everyone has different limitations or a lot of disabled are completely independent. I've become more dependent physically. Um, so at this stage right now, I can't walk or stand, and my arms have limited movement as well. I can't lift them, but I still draw, and I'm an advocate, and I do design, and I do as much as I can, and so yeah, it's pretty rare. It's genetic, and I'm an adoptee, which means my biological parents that I never met gave it to me. And they were most likely carriers, but it didn't physically manifest in them. For some reason, it starts showing up around 20s and 30s, which is strange because I played soccer my whole childhood. But uh, so I had the disease, but it doesn't physically manifest until around 20s or 30s. So it's pretty
Yeah.
rare. It's about maybe up to 3,000 people in the world have it. So it's a very rare form of basically muscular dystrophy.
Yeah,
So
that's one of the things that when it comes to like disability, I think that it's really hard to get a lot of people to understand something, especially you saying like only 3,000 people in the world are like experiencing like that. I think that when it comes to like my work that I do to like educate people on LGBT, like there's a lot of other people that I can pull on board to kind of help me like get a message across. And I know that when it comes to like advocacy for like disabilities, when people say disabled, like they a lot of times will think of someone that they know personally or a story that they've heard on the news or seen on social media, but they don't like they almost pin things all into one bunch of areas instead of realizing that it's a very complex thing to talk
Hmm.
about. And disabilities, some are completely unseen, and some
Hmm.
of them are very noticeable. And I think that even when you look, because you were talking about like the different stages that you've been through, I think that
Hmm.
a lot of people don't realize that there are some people who maybe it was an accident that caused them to be disabled. Maybe it's a
Hmm.
genetic thing that caused them to be disabled. And a lot of people walk around unknown, like disabilities that they're suffering from just because it's not something, kind of like you were saying, it wasn't until later on that you started to like see the symptoms of it. It's just such a complex thing to look at. And I think that this month, since it's like Disability Pride Month,
Hmm.
I've been really trying to connect and learn as much as I can do, because I think that last year I learned that the more I educated myself around like the Black Lives Matter movement, the more I realized there were things that I could do to help. And I think that when you jump into being an ally and doing advocacy, it's so important to like educate yourself. And the more that I've jumped into this one, it's so hard to like
Hmm.
figure out all the things that you can do to help, because something that
Hmm.
might be helpful to one disability doesn't help at all to another. And it's so hard to kind of find a place that you
Hmm.
can be a good ally.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, you're right. It's extremely complex and diverse world. Before I was disabled, I didn't know anything about disability either, and my breadth of knowledge of it was pretty much probably like the standard average person who kind of just sees a disabled person and doesn't really give much thought about it. I mean, it's not like I didn't think about it, but you realize, and it's not until just a couple of years ago where I really understood what ableism is, but we all have it, including disabled people, and we've been told a certain narrative. As soon as you see someone that's disabled, immediately feel sorry for them, pity them, because they must, have a horrible, suffering life. And as I've become an advocate, in the beginning I first started advocating. I've been an advocate for about 14 years, mostly for my rare disease, and trying to bring awareness to that, and then I've kind of merged over into disability as well, disability in general, because while I would love treatment for my condition and want to work on the awareness of that, there's also the aspect that treatment takes a long time to develop. So you also have to have an aspect of coming to acceptance and learning about your identity and learning about other people that are in your community as well. And in that process, I learned a lot about how I was mistaken as well, about my own. It also explained a lot, ableism, for example, explained a lot of why I had such difficulty dealing with and accepting it in the beginning, which is something that we all do. And even if you are aware of ableism, you would still have, you're still going to have a process of acceptance and a journey of that. Um, but the immediate thing is dread, like your whole life is over. And that's like one thing that I don't want non-disabled and disabled to think, that's not necessarily true. That doesn't mean we can't do anything or contribute anything or have nothing to offer. And that's kind of what I've been doing with my advocacy, with sharing my wheelchair travels and writing. And I began illustrating just because of my disability, because I wanted to. I thought some people identify with a message differently, some in writing, some visually. So I became a self-taught illustrator and all my illustrations are inspired from my disability and my experience from it. So to get people to understand, because I just remember how much little I understood as well. And then now that I'm in the world, I just more and more realize how complex and diverse disability is.
Yeah, I I love that you're able to kind of see that it is, when it comes to people's ability to understand it. Like sometimes when you're not a part of that community, you literally can walk through life and not realize that, hey, like this grocery store has no access for someone who's in a wheelchair. Like
Hmm.
I had a friend who planned this whole vacation, and he's in a wheelchair, and he went through so many steps to make sure that everything that him and his boyfriend had planned
Hmm.
was accessible to him as a person. And when he got there, he still ran into places that were like, yeah, we're perfectly fine with handicapped people.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're accessible. And he got there, and there's like
Yeah.
these huge steps that go into the hotel, and like
Yeah.
that offset his entire vacation.
Yeah.
And I think it's important because I've learned that the more like that you hear and see about stuff like that, the more
Mm.
aware you become of the different things that could be easily fixed, maybe from when it's first built. That needs to be on your first like thought when
Mhm.
cities are doing city planning, like, is disability something that's on that board so that they are looking at it when anything is being introduced new to the area. And there was just so many different places now that I'm more aware when I'm walking about. I'm just like, wow, where's the ramp for this? And
Mhm.
like, then I like see certain places with like people who might suffer from like passing out or fainting from different things. I'm just like, I went into a restaurant and like the waiting room had like really flashy lights.
Mhm.
And I was like, there's no warning about this. Like that could really mess someone up there.
Mhm.
And I've just been more aware, and things like that I think just need to be brought up and talked about, but it requires people to have a better understanding of it as well.
Yeah, it's really amazing when I go through that all the time too. Like I'm more of a spontaneous traveler, but as I progress, you really do have to plan it out because it makes you could be wasting hundreds of dollars going to an area, or you could be, I mean, there's so many aspects of it. So it takes a lot to plan. And I do as much research as I can about an area. How does that hotel look in other pictures or Google Maps? But it doesn't matter how much research you do. As soon as you get there, it doesn't matter if they told you something was accessible. They'll, like you said, your friend, there'll be like stairs there, and it's like, wait, and you realize how little people get it. It's like, but I just told you I was in a wheelchair and I can't ascend stairs. Or like at the airport when I'm, waiting to be go onto the airplane and they have a person to put you in an aisle chair and they'll say things, can't you just get up and walk? And I was like, no, I'm in a wheelchair and I can't walk. So even we don't ever usually use tours. But when I went to Peru to do Machu Picchu, I did for that one day. I booked it through an accessible tour company that would help us up Machu Picchu. And that one was founded by a paraplegic. And I was just shocked to, when I got there, to be, they assigned us this other tour group, contracted out to them that basically looked like they never knew how to interact with disabilities. So I was actually really angry about that. That even a paraplegic who owns a tour company specifically for disabled had all of these barriers that they never explained to us. It was just like a nightmare. So I'm like, wow, even disabled people, who should know more than anyone, say things, yeah, everything's fine, they'll be accessible. And it's like, it was a complete nightmare every day to get to Machu Picchu because of that. But yeah, it always happens, never fails.
So one thing that I've seen a lot of in like advocacy and when people are trying to help educate people is it does get very repetitive. It almost seems like every single new person you get in contact with, you have to spend some time educating them on something to like help them better understand other people's situations that are different than theirs. And
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of people who can get very negative, can start to get angry for people not having the understanding. How do you kind of navigate through that without like allowing it to like negatively impact you and your mental health?
That's a really good question, honestly, and it's something that I've been wanting to talk about. What I would call constructive advocacy. So I try to remember how little I knew about disability, and what I think there needs to be a mix of hard and soft. And I see a lot of advocates. Sometimes it's a little bit like it's like extremely aggressive and accusational, and like I like talking about systems and stuff, like ableist systems and structures, but I'm not necessarily micro policing and going around saying, oh, you didn't post a picture with a disabled person and that you're an ableist. I see some of that going around, and I think that even myself as a disabled person, I'm still learning. And what I just try to remember that it wasn't it wasn't made obvious to me or proposed to me back when I was able-bodied or non-disabled to think about the world of disability, because in general society wasn't set up that way. We've always been told a certain amount of people are the you know the average, the normal, the most sought after, which is able-bodied, specific race, and that's what we largely saw in media and out in front of us and stuff like that. So I was never thought to like question about what's it like life with disability, or do they have equity, do they have access? You never thought of that. So I think that's in general most people, and when they're most people are made to realize that, then they're curious and they want to know. So I'm not looking to attack every person who may not know, because I think shaming doesn't necessarily help a cause of getting people to understand something. And I think most people in general do want to know. When it's kind of surprising where I'm using most people as first disabled person, and they're good people and they just never thought about it, but now they're thinking about it because they know me. But had I just attacked them for not knowing something, that immediately turns people off. So I think that's just a really good question of like, how do you deal with that? You have to have a little bit of grace, can't have too much self-righteousness. And with disability, I feel like it does need education, because I can say, oh, I'm too tired to educate you, but that's what I am, and I'm an advocate, and I want people to know. And in general, disability is not something that you would understand unless you experience it. So I'm pretty patient to want to explain and educate people, because I find most people really do want to know. They're just afraid to ask, or like, are you okay with being asked, or whatever. But in general, I just want them to take from there to go off and research on their own as well. But I think with advocacy, I don't get too, I mean, yeah, sometimes I get upset about more systemic things like airlines, for example, breaking new wheelchairs. That stuff I get upset at, like companies or company culture or that type of stuff, societal ignorance. But in general, I don't try to make it personal at individuals. And I think you'll invite a lot more people to want to, be allies and also understand, because it's a very complex world.
Yeah, I I was reading some of your posts, and something that I really liked was I love the idea of focusing on the strength of people with disabilities instead of like feeling sorry for anyone, because when you live in a world where you don't fit the standard and you have to figure out how to navigate life in a completely different way because the world's not catering to you or your disability, I think that that's an amazing strength. And that's something that I also try to promote in the LGBT community, is like the strength that you have to like go through a world that wasn't built for you, and still succeed and still achieve everything that you want. I know that like with disabilities, when it's something that's very instant, whether it's an accident or if it's something where over time you slowly start to lose all the functions that you were so used to having, like the mindset, it definitely requires you to train your mind, like you were saying earlier, not to like feel sorry for yourself or not pity yourself, but this is this is my new reality. How can I navigate this as smoothly as possible? How can I do this with strength? What are my options now in life? And I think that that's really important for people to realize. Like it, it's just a different path now. It's not
Mhm.
like a completely shut off. This person's no longer capable of
Yeah.
functioning. It's just
Mhm.
this person is now functioning in this lane instead of this lane. And I think that it's important for people to realize that.
Yeah, there's I like I said, I've only begun to learn about ableism a couple years ago, and growing up when I was going through this in my early 20s, I had no disabled role models. I didn't know anyone disabled. I didn't know how do you live, how do you act. All I knew is I just wanted to still live, so I didn't really abide by any standard of how a disabled person should live. I just continued to still live my life. But after learning about ableism, you realize, terms like suffering or feeling like um, the pity for yourself as well. That's something that we've been taught by society, and why when someone does become disabled, it's so hard to deal with it or accept it or integrate it to your life, because all you can see is something that so negative, and I don't want it, and it just makes the process even harder. But then you realize when you learn about ableism, it's like, oh, that makes it even harder, because I've been told that disabled people are just like, well, that's it. You're just going to be wheelchair bound and suffering, and you have no life. And that's what's changed a lot in the last couple of years too, is terminology, saying things like someone is suffering from something. A lot, like media usually does that with headlines and articles, or they'll say wheelchair bound. And those, they seem so subtle, but they also feed, my own narrative about myself or another disabled person's narrative. And they're all negative terms. And then you realize, wait, I'm more than this. I'm still the person I was before the disability. Um, and I'm still it's okay to identify as disabled. That's another thing that's recent, is saying disabled is not a bad word. There's all these alternative terms that have been created throughout the years, like differently abled, special needs. And if a disabled person wants to be called that, then I perfectly support it. But for me, I also very much on the wagon of it's okay to say disabled, like that's not a bad word. And I think we've been taught that, both non-disabled and disabled. And for non-disabled, they've been taught that, and they have such low expectations when they see us. Like, isn't that sad? Like, I could have nothing else going on in my life, but just sitting in my room crying. And that's something that really makes me angry about wanting to change that perspective when people see me, is only seeing people as one thing. And that's because, like what I mentioned earlier, is a few people decided what was okay, what was considered normal. And everyone else that lives outside of it, whether you're a plus size body or you're a different race or different ability, has to feel like they're not measuring up. But what that measurement of normal or spectrum doesn't measure is the variety of things that people can contribute. And, I can do a lot more than just walking, or humans can contribute a lot more than just walking. There's other things about us. So, yeah, it was very,
Yeah.
learning about that was very changing in terms of the mentality.
Yeah, I think that it's important to see that everyone has something that they can offer the world. And last year with like the Black Lives Matter protests, there was a lot of people like saying a lot of things if you weren't meeting the qualifications of what they thought were protesting or standing up for the cause. And a lot of the things that I was trying to put out there was just like there are things that you can ask people to do. Like an artist can be an artist for a cause. That is just as powerful as someone standing in a protest. An author can write, a singer can sing. Like everyone has an ability that they can share and use towards a cause to move us in the right direction. And I think that a lot of people do have like that idea of a standard. And as soon as you don't hit that standard, they start to kind of look at people as, well, you don't have as much to contribute. And I always try to tell people, I'm like, we have to look at everyone's strengths and celebrate that. The back of my shirt actually says, like, the community comes together because we have similarities. The strength of the community comes from our differences. And I think that that is an important thing to learn and understand, because if we were all the same, we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't have progressed as far as we did. And when it comes to people with different disabilities, like, we might be catering to one person's disability here, but that catering can help a lot more than just that one specific person that originally brought that up. And I think that people, because disabilities have so many different like avenues, because you could be blind, you could be deaf, like those are two completely different disabilities that need different types of things to be changed to help them. But that doesn't mean that that's not going to help other people down the road, because I always tell people, like, we're not guaranteed anything in life. Like, I mean, I recently started having really bad back problems, and that made me even more aware of things that weren't as accessible to other people. And I was like, wow, like it really doesn't like come to focus until you come into experience with it, or someone you really care about does.
Yeah, there's a good quote that says something basically that, like, you don't care until it happens to you, type of thing. And that's not to me like a fear mongering thing, like, oh, you could be disabled next, because again, that puts a negative layer on disability, like it's the most atrocious thing that ever could happen to you, you're disabled. And it's not. Is it easy? No, it's not. I think especially progressive is really difficult. I think if I had a disability that was more paraplegic and I was completely independent, where I could drive and go to the bathroom by myself and all that, it would be so much easier in terms of the grief process and all that. I shouldn't say easier, just different, because I don't want to say, everyone experiences disability differently. Um, but it's interesting we say that, where like adapting towards one thing could potentially help a whole another group. And that's a good subject to touch upon. As a designer, industry designer, I saw a lot of that where they never designed for disabled in mind. Or when I was going to college, and I went to a Detroit Industrial Design College, Art and Design College, and one of my projects is a wheelchair, because I was walking still then, but I realized that wheelchairs look like death traps. They look so terrible. There was nothing innovative or stylish about them, and more of the project was based around this idea of like, why is disabled have when you're designing for disabled have such a low bar in terms of design? Like, oh, well, they're disabled, they don't want anything beautiful, or they don't want anything design or things like that. And when you look at the ADA, for example, that was met with so much adversity. People moving against it. Oh, we're going to have to put a cut-in ramp, so we're going to have to put an elevator or a ramp. What? This is crazy. I don't know if you know, but churches was actually the biggest movement against the ADA, and colleges too. Churches got away with not having to be accessible because of separation of church and state. So churches don't actually have to be accessible, but colleges, they eventually were forced to. But they were the other second most loud voice against ADA. What happened afterwards is everyone that was upset are the ones who use it the most. Let the curb cut-ins, all these things that are just a basic everyday part of our life now. More non-disabled people use those than disabled. And so I'm kind of merging this over to the idea as well as to like designing the way we design our world, the way we design our buildings or our grounds. There's a garden, and there's this little park in Santa Monica, and there's no stairs anywhere. It's all ramps. When I was in Michigan, there was this sculpture garden that was no ramps. It was all flat, or I'm not sorry, no stairs. It was all flat and accessible. And the design was really beautiful. And kind of like what I'm saying is, people think like design companies, for example, they just think, oh, I got to design this so that a disabled person can use it. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be horrible. But all they've done is add a new variable to design for, and you can't imagine thinking up and designing new ways of interacting with something or a user experience, or designing like Microsoft did an adaptive video game controller. It's completely flat, and maybe because they designed it for disabled in mind, maybe the way they designed that controller, it looks really sleek. It's flat. Different people with different hand capabilities can use it, can contribute to future designs in terms of thinking bigger, in terms of that's something that everybody can use. That's not just disabled. So I think people just get down on thinking about, oh, now I got to think about design, disabled when I'm designing, instead of thinking it as opportunity of a new perspective that you'd never thought of, that everyone could, take advantage of or use or utilize.
Yeah, just hearing you talk about like that, with like going through architecture in college, like there were so many designs that we did, and not once did we ever really talk about like accessibility within that program. But like in my head, like I could think of like an entire like course that you could probably teach on ways to make things more accessible, and almost like using that as like to beautify like the ramps can be a part of art. Like architecture is like everything, like the absence of space, the presence of like
Mm-hmm.
colors and everything. Like a ramp to get into a building versus steps could be done so beautifully that it would really add to the visual effect of any type of building. But it almost seems like the ugly part of the ramp would be if it became an afterthought that was just like thrown onto
Yeah,
something, because
yeah.
they didn't think about it in the first place to make it part of the art of the architecture.
Right. And then for a designer, you just have to think of it as a design challenge variable, just like any aspect when we're designing something. Okay, I have to design it for a person to get in that. I have to design it for this to happen, this to happen. All you're doing is, well, why don't we just also think about the design in terms of including everyone? Nobody misses stairs. Non-disabled people can use ramps. At the Sculpture Garden Park I was in Michigan, it was just beautiful. I mean, everything was just beautifully laid out. Everything was like a subtle incline, and nobody missed the stairs. So why can't we like think like that more? because then everyone's involved. And again, I don't mean to say use disability like this fear mongering, like it could be you that's disabled, or if aging or death doesn't catch you first, then this is something that should affect all of us. So it's not meant to be like, oh, well, you should think about this because it could be you that's disabled and suffering as well. I don't mean to say it like that. It's not that. Because I really don't want to pigeonhole disabled as a suffering image. I don't like that. But it could happen to you, and it's something that affects all of us, or our family members, or our loved ones. Every one of us can become disabled, or have just not even disabled, just like you said, you're having back issues. Maybe when you're turning 60 and it's getting difficult to walk, you would like to go to a sculpture garden without having to do stairs. Like it fits everybody. It's not for just disabled, it's for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, like a lot of families end up moving when if someone in their family gets older and can't handle steps. I know that when my grandparents were getting older, like they moved from a house that was like steps down to the basement, steps upstairs, like everywhere there were steps. And they're like, we can still walk up these steps, but it feels like we're climbing a mountain every single day. And they think like, wouldn't it be nice to have a home that I don't become exhausted just trying to get to the bathroom? And that can be something that happens to everyone that if it's something that we can easily design out of, I think that new buildings should automatically be thinking about that. I currently live in like an apartment complex where it was an old factory building that they cleaned out and then put apartments in. And originally this had no accessibility to it. It was like steps everywhere. But now they've got whole entrances for like the first, second, and third floors to where people can get in it, just rolling right into it. And but like going through architecture, like I look at older buildings, like when you go to DC, those buildings are old and you
Mm-hmm.
see how they have put in like the metal ramps or the wooden ramps into the stone marble buildings. And like Frank Lloyd Wright, he's like my favorite architect. His buildings, because we had to deal with my granddad passing out in his home, and they had to like get the gurney in there to get him out,
Mm-hmm.
and they were struggling in our home. But when I went through the tour of Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water, which is like my favorite building, they were demonstrating like I had to turn sideways to get through the hallway
Mm-hmm.
because it was such a narrow hallway. And his architectural like design for it was to like open into the space and create a small bedroom because that's not where he wanted people to stay. But like the accessibility of that was like impossible for most people. And that was back before any type of codes were required. Like
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't build stuff like that now because of the codes that they're putting in place. And I think more code should be put in place where all spaces should have handicap access to it.
Yeah, and with the Frank Lloyd Wright, like I wonder too if so I get how we think is it. I actually was also going to go into architecture before I went to industrial design. I don't know if you've heard of a school called Michigan called Lawrence Tech.
Mm-mm.
Anyways, I was going to go be an architect before I went to design, but uh, for him to create that same design element that he was conceptualizing or wanted, where it's a small space that entered into a big space, because he wanted people to flow out into the larger space. If you could still do that, but just add the element of accessibility, like how do you do that? Like I just wonder, like what you could have come up with if you just added that one little caveat. But what people don't realize, and you often hear this thing is like, oh, we gotta make it accessible for that one disabled person, or oh, there's gotta be disabled parking for maybe one disabled person who might come. What people don't realize is, well, there's 1.3 billion disabled people in the world, 20 up to 25% in America, and I don't think they realize like how much one less of an effort it is just to add, something like a disabled parking spot or accessibility, but they don't understand what it's like. I think they see us as this outside group, but we're this. I lived in both worlds. I was non-disabled and now I'm disabled, and we're not an outside group. I'm the exact same person as you. I just happened to get a very fun genetic disease that I didn't ask for. But I'm still the same person. And for example, when I went into a wheelchair and I moved to San Francisco, I moved from a company in LA and moved to San Francisco. and I had just started going into wheelchair. So this is my first set of interviews in a wheelchair. And a lot of these companies, they loved my work. We did 3 interviews on the phone. They wanted to hire me. The last bit was just meeting me in person, and I had to go to their office that wasn't accessible, that had stairs. And it was demoralizing to have to call in and ask for the manager who was going to be interviewing me to come out and help me get into his building. Well, right there, because we've been taught to see, oh my God, that person is disabled or they can't walk, that clearly she can't do anything except that he's gone through my portfolio. He listened to me on the phone through several interviews. He loved my work. And the only caveat was the fact that she's in a wheelchair. And that just completely wiped any positive images he had of me, all because he had to help me because his building wasn't accessible. And so it's like really demoralizing and dehumanizing. And a lot of people say a lot of things about like, oh, I don't want to be paying for disabled people or welfare or this type of stuff. But it's like they also don't understand people don't hire us. So where is the opportunity? Most disabled people want to be able to contribute. We want to be out there. We want to be in the world and working and doing stuff. But it makes it so hard when society creates more barriers than the disability itself.
Yeah, I just recently saw a post where it was talking about like people who are like getting disability, if they get married, like they can lose their disability like checks, which I think that that completely blew my mind when I saw that because it being married doesn't change how you're moving through the world. Yes, you
Yeah.
might have someone there that can help you at some point in your life, but like you were saying, most people want to function on their own. You're
Yeah.
not like getting married doesn't mean you now have a personal assistant to like take you everywhere you want to go. Like I couldn't believe that that was even a thing. And the
Yeah.
more I was diving into those types of things, that's everywhere. And I don't think people realize that there's a lot more than just accessibility that is pressing against people with disabilities' ability to navigate in the world.
Yeah. No, yeah, disabled don't have marriage equality because of that. And what people don't realize is they think, oh, well, you're married now, you don't need that. Well, there's a couple things. First of all, SSI is only 500 and I think $51. That's below poverty level. So it's not even that much anyways. Um, but say a disabled person is married to someone and they've just lost all their uh, disability and check and etc. What if that relationship ends up being abusive, which often happens for disabled? Then that disabled person has no autonomy. They have no, I mean, 551 a month is like nothing anyways. It's below poverty level, but at least something. They have no agency. They have no autonomy. They don't have the freedom to leave because now they are completely financially dependent on the partner and they don't have their own, security. There's so many reasons why that is just a terrible idea. And like I keep saying, with $551, I don't think that's kind of something I talk about a lot is people don't realize how expensive it is to be disabled. Most people don't have to spend, a few $10,000 to build a ramp to get into their house. Or for me, the current problem is we're saving to get a shower, take out the tub, so it's just a roll-in shower because it's getting difficult for my husband to help me into the bathtub. So, things like that, and it's probably gonna be like $20,000 to get the bathroom renovated. Our wheelchairs cost as much as cars, and a lot of private insurances don't cover them. Like mine is not covered because they didn't think it was necessary. Um, there's so many barriers and it's so expensive to get a accessible van and to drive. We're probably about $80,000 to be able to get hand control as an accessible van. So it's really expensive to be disabled. And then people are saying stuff like that, where, oh, well, if you get married, you should, your social security check should go away. It's like, well, not every disabled person has um, a family to help. Not every, yeah. So it's kind of crazy how people think sometimes, but they don't experience it, so they don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, just the thought of like thinking about getting something customized to your disability, like that that is expensive because even trying to get something that's a little custom just because you want something custom, you know that it's more expensive to do that. And like I was looking at one of my friend's cars that he had to cater to his disability. to where like the brakes and gas were accessible to like the hands instead of his legs. And the cost of that like is so expensive.
It's a,
Like the cost to get the car fixed, uh, say if it was totaled, that doesn't cover getting another car that is going to be modified to fit, like help him with his disability. And I think that a lot of people don't realize like the cost of all of that customization, and anything that we can do that simplifies anything. And I there's also stuff where I was talking to some of my friends that have disabilities where they talk about like the caregivers that they've had to go through to
Mhm.
find caregivers that actually care,
Yeah,
because there's a lot of people in that field of work that should never be around another human being because they're horrible people.
yeah.
And I was blown away by like, he was like, one year I went through like 16 different caregivers because he was like, I was lucky enough that like people believed me when I told them like the things that were going wrong. And he said that even after like dealing with maybe 5 people leaving, he had someone was like, well, maybe it's you. Maybe you're just difficult to work with. And that's why these caregivers, you're having so many troubles. And it's like, no, they're just not like, they're not accepting his like disability. They're not hearing him say, I can't do this, I need help with this.
Hmm.
They're making assumptions based upon their knowledge of that disability and not being helpful to him.
Yeah.
And that adds stress that you have to navigate through, and that's really not easy.
Yeah, if people really knew, I mean, there's a, you know, certain arms of advocacy where you want people to see you as quote unquote normal and beyond the disability and just regular people and stuff. But then there's also the aspect of wanting people to know you just will never imagine it until you have to actually, until you live a day and literally everything has to be thought out. Everything has to be planned. Everything has to be thought out. There, everything is a barrier, and everything is expensive. Everything has to be thought out just to be able to like brush my teeth or, you know, it's just it's never ending. Like when we bought our place, like figuring out how I'm going to get in the house for myself because my hands. So I tied a string to my doorknob, and then I got a door lock that I can lock through my phone, and then I got a little ramp, and then I did a double, what do they call it, double hinges, so that I can just push the chair open with my wheelchair once I unlock it, rather than having to put my arm up and twist it. So it's like it's literally everything like that. There's like 1,000 steps for everything to just to do
Yeah.
something. So
I mean, the fact that you can go through life and do all of that, I think that like that's an amazing accomplishment. I think that that is something that you should be proud of, because I think that when it comes to stuff like that, you hear, you were kind of talking about it before, like when it came to like people with able bodies, we are taught by society to like be a victim of something. We are taught to like feel sorry for me. Like I know that when my back was hurting, I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. I didn't want to cancel anything that I had planned. But there were some things where like I was just like, I literally had to like grab the side of my bed and just pull myself out and fall into the floor and crawl to something where I could pull myself up. And I don't think people realize, because like my friend, he was telling me like he has to make all these plans when the caregiver is in his home, because if it's not all planned out and the caregiver leaves, like it costs more to have them come back, if something needs to be done
hmm,
off
yeah,
off the regular schedule. And I think that that you having to do all of that, just like that's a superpower. I think that a lot of people don't realize. I think that a disability may seem like something that like pulls you down or might be something that makes life not as easy, but I feel like that also makes like you come up with more innovative things that an average person wouldn't think about. Like i I think that all the things that I've heard people coming up with to kind of navigate the world and make their life easier, like I think that that's an amazing thing to be able to do. I know that you're doing it out of like a necessity,
Hmm.
but you also are taking it upon yourself to do advocacy. And I think that that's not something you have to do. Like, you don't have to do that. And I think that that's an amazing thing that you're using your journey as like a story for people to better understand that, because there are going to be people that can't be you. They don't have the willpower to be a voice as well to get through that. And I think that the work that you're doing, I think that that needs to be celebrated, because you are helping people, whether they've got the same disability as you or another disability that they're living with. Like, seeing you out there in your wheelchair, traveling and seeing the world, it automatically erases that mindset of I'm limited and I can't. And I think that that's a beautiful thing that you are doing for people, because like, it's so easy to let the world tell us that we can't do something. Even people who don't have a disability sometimes allow the world to tell them they can't do something. And I think that that's an amazing thing that you are pushing through with the strength, and not, you're erasing the can'ts and cannot do's for
Hmm.
people. That's an amazing thing, because it's so important for people to not let that stop them from moving forward and achieving anything that they want to do.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that a lot of people say that, like, I just don't know how I can do that. And I think we don't give ourselves enough credit. There's an element we have to disabled people have to, so we don't really have a choice. Of course, how far we take it, are we been willing to do more, is an element from your personal character. But in general, how we handle every day, you just kind of have to. There's really no choice. And I think a lot of people would find that they could too. But there is that element of that I don't think people realize about our community is we do have to be extremely innovative every day. Um, there's the way we think, the way we see things, and that's what I mean by when people see disabled. Hopefully, one day it becomes so normalized where you don't think sad anymore because someone's disabled, or like, oh, I'm glad that's not me. Because I don't want people to think it's like the worst thing in the world. It's not better or worse. It's just, I just want people to see it as a different way of seeing life. And for me, I'm a very curious person, and I like meeting people who are very different than me, because I just want to understand, well, how do they see life? How do they see it from where they stand or sit? Like, that's really important to me, to want to see how do they see the world, because I know how I see it, but how does someone else see it, and how do they experience it? And that's what I just want people to see, is it's just another subgroup that is valuable because we see things and experience life differently than most people. And that should be, when we talk about humans and stories and things, or when you're saying when you're designing for a certain demographic, it's like, well, why is it just for a certain demographic? Can't it just be for, like, the spectrum of humanity in general? Like, we're not just one group. We're, humans we're a bunch of groups that form a collective vision of what life is like on this earth. So,
Yeah, I think that the more people you connect with, the more curious you are about the world and all its differences, the more you can create things that will literally be there for everyone as a whole. And I think that the idea of seeing the whole community as a whole and not segregating everyone by their
yeah.
different means of life is so important, because like you said, every new person you get to meet, it's like it's a whole new like perspective to see life in. And I think that the more people that share their stories, the more people. I love that social media has kind of become what it has. Of course,
Hmm.
it's a double-ended sword. Like, it can be
Yeah.
used for evil, but it can
Good.
also
And
be
yeah.
to
Right.
share beautiful stories. And I know that when I lived in a very small town in the middle of nowhere, like, I felt very alone as an LGBT person. And I know that social media has really helped connect the communities, because like you were saying, if there's only 3,000 people out there, more than likely you're not all in the same place.
Hmm.
So being able to connect with other people, because maybe there's something that someone in another country has learned that you haven't, And that's something that you just have to be able to communicate with. And I think that that is an amazing thing that people can utilize. But we do have to open our minds to surround ourselves with people who see the world differently than we do,
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
I see that. Then again, we are all differently abled. Yeah, I always tell people to focus on the things that they have and can do, and not on the things that they can't do.
Hmm.
Because I
Because all
mean,
of us have things we can't do, disabled or not.
yeah,
I mean, no one says that, oh, this person can't draw, they're disabled. Like, I can draw, like, um, but, just different people can do certain things and not, and, doesn't mean that they're better or worse.
yeah.
You know?
I mean, we're all given certain gifts in life, and we are meant to go through our life using those gifts to give back to the world in any way that we can. And I think that that's a beautiful thing, because I'm not much of an artist. Like, I've seen like some of my friends' arts, and it's so weird to me to look at some people's, like, how they literally can get like the muscles of animals and everything perfectly. Like, my brain just doesn't see that the same way. Like, I can draw like an elephant, but it's not gonna look like the most illustrated, like almost like it could step out of the drawing itself. But like, to celebrate each other's gifts, I think we could all get better at that. I think that we need to remember just celebrating each other's like special abilities, because we all have something that we can give to the world. And I think too often we just accept that, oh, that person can edit videos, oh, that person can do this, and
Hmm.
we don't tell them like thank you for that too much. We just assume that that's something that they can do.
Hmm.
And I always try to get people to realize that if you're surrounded by tons and tons of people that are exactly like yourself, then you need to step out of your box and find some diversity to surround yourself with, because you're only hurting yourself if you're surrounded by people that think like you.
Right, yeah. You're not really growing and learning if that's what you're doing, for sure. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it just closes up your world and how you can open up and see things that are different from you, for sure. So,
Yeah. And I know that you said that you've moved a couple times. Like, have you found that there's any like place that's a little bit more accessible and more aware, or do you think that it's kind of like spotchy everywhere you go when it comes to people being more aware of stuff like that?
I mean, in the United States, I would say in general, they're all pretty similar. I mean, San Francisco, when I lived there, that was a little harder. Chicago, I was walking at that time with the cane, that was a little harder. But in general, across the state, I think it's about the same with accessibility. I think maybe obviously it's a little more open-minded out in California in terms of versus when I lived in Michigan. Um, yeah, just people a little bit more open. I think maybe if someone sees you in Michigan disabled, it's maybe a little bit different of a response.
Are there
But
any like businesses or anything out there that you think have really done like a great job of making sure that their like businesses and everything are accessible?
there's none really that's like what I've like seen where they're like that's like a huge initiative of theirs. I mean, in general, most buildings are fairly accessible. United States, I think, is better than most countries, but we still have a
Mm.
long ways to go because obviously a lot of things aren't accessible. But nothing really specific. I think right now it's kind of corporations are really jumping on the disability, realizing that we're kind of in our second disability movement. So they're all, whether it's just grandstanding and attaching themselves to a popular social trend or whatever, or whether they care or not. It's usually with corporations. It's for obvious reasons. They're like, oh, this is popular right now, so let's jump on it. Do they really care? I'm not sure, but the point is to pressure them to care enough because it affects their bottom dollar. So,
Yeah. I was gonna say, with like the last minute that we've got, like when it comes to other people out in the world, like what do you think that everyone on this planet could do to kind of help move this a little bit more forward for people who are still navigating the world with disabilities and still struggling? How can like everyone kind of lend a helping hand that would be useful?
I think number one is of like just educating yourself, just following other disabled people and um, reading books by disabled, or just kind of understanding what that world is like, just being curious enough to understand, and then talking about it with your non-disabled friends. And because like I said before, a lot of people, once they're told to think about it, there's this quote by this disabled advocate is basically says, the most political, going into a room with a wheelchair is the most political statement you can make. They don't think of us until they see us. So, people don't see us, they don't think about it. So if more non-disabled community is talking about it, and then more people will think about it. They're just not told to think about us. But once they're told to think about us, I feel like more people will want change, because I think people get that that makes sense. And not to do it out of pity, like, oh, this is so sad, poor disabled people, they need our help because, they, this or that. It's just like, no, it's a fellow human. This is something that could affect all of us. And it's not right that they can't have very basic equity or access. And just talking about it and educating yourself about it.
Yeah, I I've definitely realized that when it comes to my knowledge of things, like following someone like you on social media, like that does pop up in my news feed, and it does bring new things to my line of sight so that I can be aware of it, and then I can take that extra time to look deeper into those things. And I think that that is a beautiful thing, to be able to connect with people on social media like this and have that time and space. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for jumping on this live with me. I think that you're a phenomenal person. I absolutely love your profile.
Thank you.
I'm also a traveler when it comes to those things. So I look at your pictures, and I can't wait for this pandemic to kind of lift so that I can get out and go to places like that again, because it's definitely beautiful. And like I said, I absolutely love that you are using your platform to educate. I know it's not always the easiest, and sometimes life can get rough for you, but it looks like you still put time and effort into something that it's making a difference, and I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the invite. It was nice meeting you and talking.
Yeah, no problem. And we will keep in touch, and I will let you go so that you can enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thanks so much. You have a good one.
Yep, you too. Bye.
Bye.